My name is Lisa. I'm the Executive Director at the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance. We also have Beth Wasden, who's going to be handling our IT. You can kind of see her there. And Cindy Williams is going to be keeping an eye on if we have questions in the chat and to make sure to let the presenter know when they're done presenting. So each presenter has about 20 minutes. We're going to shoot for about 15 minutes of presentation and then about 5 minutes of questions. And then we'll also, have the people's information available, and we're planning to record this as well if you want to check back and see if you missed something or share with different people as well. So we'll need a little time to kind of turn that over, but we plan to have that on the website as well so people can check out some of the presentations. I also want to thank, we have several sponsors. The Friends of the Nanticoke is a nonprofit advocacy group that we work with all the time on different things. And I don't know if Judith is on there right now, but Judith Stribling and Jay and a couple other folks have joined us. And they're actually presenting tomorrow, but they're kind of a co-partner with us on this project and helped solicit presentations that we thought were really good things happening in and around the Nanticoke, as well as selecting the presentations for today and tomorrow. So thank you to them. And also thank you for Denrick and Campbell's, who are our sponsors for today. Our hope in the future and our original plan was to do a classroom style, NantiCon 1 year, and every other year do a bus tour of innovative projects. So we're still hoping to do that, but I didn't think many people want to pile up in a bus together, the past 2 years. So hopefully, in the next year or so, we'll be able to plan a field trip version of this, but we still plan to do this online format every other year. To share the in and around and ongoings of the Nanticoke. So we have a lot of exciting projects. We also have, I want to make sure I hit all my notes here. And we also have a couple of different presentations from partners sharing different projects they're doing. And then we even have a few projects that are slightly outside the Nanticoke, but would be great examples to take place in the Nanticoke. So, does anyone have any questions before we get started? We'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to hand it over to Beth Wasden. She's our volunteer coordinator at the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance, and she's going to be presenting on getting results, Nanticoke River Creek Watchers, and the annual report card.
So, welcome everybody to NantiCon 2022. I believe I kicked things off the last time at the State of the Nanticoke River, which was held at Salisbury. So I'm very happy to kick things off once again. As Lisa said, my name is Beth Wasden. I'm the Volunteer and Outreach Coordinator, and I am going to be talking briefly about our Nanticoke Creek Watchers program and our annual report card and the results that we got for the 2020 season. So first of all, some of you may know about our Nanticoke Creek Watchers program, some of you may not, but just as some basic points about our program so you know why our program rocks exactly. First of all, we are about to embark on our 15th full season this year. So it's mid-February. My head is definitely in the Creek Watchers game right now. This is it's a great milestone for us, and of course next year we'll be releasing a special report card that looks at the first 15 years of data from our program. Our program is volunteer driven. We are one of several community science based water monitoring programs in the Chesapeake Bay region. Since the beginning of our program, over 140 volunteers have assisted us. And of course, they're also known as our rock stars. Those rock stars have served over 18,000 hours in support of our program, providing service that's valued at around $514,000. We do have an EPA approved Quality Assurance Project Plan, or QAP. That's our methodology. That's the step-by-step. This is what you do. This is how you do it. And our Creek Watchers are trained on how to do that, and they are expected to follow that protocol when they're out in the field. To that end, our data is tier 3. And what that means is that our tidal data can be used for policy and management decisions by Chesapeake Bay program agencies. Currently, we monitor 35 sites. 4 of those are in the Fishing Bay headwaters. The rest are in the Nanticoke River watershed. And when we look at our data, we use the Mid-Atlantic Tributary Assessment Coalition's multi-threshold criteria for our data analysis. And what that means is most of our data have a 0 to 5 per data point grade or score that can be given. And then what we do is for each parameter and each data point, we get an average, and then we have to average all of the sites that are in specific sub-watersheds or regions. Now, if you would like to view or download our data, you can do so by traveling over to cmc.vims.edu. Our data since 2017 is available at the Chesapeake Data Explorer. If you want data prior to 2017, just contact me and I can send you a link to our Dropbox where we have every season's data in a neat little spreadsheet, and you can create charts and graphs and examine data to your heart's delight. A really cool thing is that our data are now periodically updated to the Bay Program's Data Hub, which is at data.chesapeakebay.net/water quality. And of course, our data would fall under the non-traditional volunteer section. So just look for that. 2020, what a weirdo year, right? I mean, for everybody. And it was weird in terms of our Creek Watchers program as well, because we start in March, and March was a great unknown that year. However, we were able to send our Creek Watchers out to get field data. The nice thing about the Nanticoke is that a lot of our sites are in places where you really can socially distance pretty easily. What this does mean is that we did have a greatly reduced nutrient sampling schedule in 2020. We didn't start taking samples until late May, and then we took them once a month as opposed to every sampling period. We had a slightly reduced chlorophyll A schedule. We started taking those samples in late April. So we did only miss a couple of sampling periods for that. And like I said earlier, our field parameters such as water clarity and dissolved oxygen, those are on a normal schedule. But this report card is always going to have, and looking at the data sets for the season, it's always going to have asterisks next to it because we weren't consistent with the number of samples that we took. And of course, consistency is a huge part of the program. If you look at the results, you can see that our shining examples, and pretty much this is it year after year, the Marshy Hope Creek, which scored a B-, and that was flat. That was the same score that it received in 2019. And the Delaware headwaters, which consist of a lot of small and maybe not so small, such as Deep Creek, but it includes the upper Nanticoke River, the non-tidal section, Deep Creek, Gravelly Branch, and some other small tributaries. That actually scored the highest in 2020, getting a B, and that was a slight improvement on 2019. Broad Creek and Lower Creek scored C's, and they were flat when compared to 2019. Those were the same grades. The creeks overall, just as the river did, scored a C+. Again, those were flat. The Lower Nanticoke scored a C+, same grade it had in 2019. And the Upper Nanticoke, we see that going back and forth, but it certainly is trending downwards and has been for several years now. The upper Nanticoke is Seaford from the boat ramp down to Sharptown and Cherry Beach. So that segment of the river has certainly declined, and unfortunately does not show any sign of improving. Fishing Bay is a watershed that's next to the Nanticoke and along with the Wicomico, and the Nanticoke empties out into Tangier Sound. So we do monitor 4 sites, as I said, are our partners, Dorchester Citizens for Planned Growth, monitor those sites, and then we also use a Bay program site that's at the mouth of Fishing Bay for that grade. And unfortunately, it has been performing poorly since the beginning of the program, and is really also trending downwards. And it scored a D+, which is the same grade that it got in 2019. So if we look at the river and some things that we can tease out from our data in 2019, we saw worse water clarity in both the upper Nanticoke, in the upper Nanticoke, but the lower Nanticoke remained flat. Pretty much across the board, total phosphorus greatly worsened in both areas. But again, you've got that asterisk there because we had a much reduced nutrient schedule. And so with total phosphorus and total nitrogen, these are things that you need to keep in mind. We did see, because it was a wacky year, we saw a great improvement in the lower Nanticoke when looking at total nitrogen, but we saw a worse grade for the upper Nanticoke. And again, the upper Nanticoke declined from a C+ in 2019 to a C in 2020. When we look at the creeks, so again, that's going to be Marshy Hope Creek, the Delaware headwaters, the lower creeks, and Broad Creek. All of the segments showed improvements in chlorophyll A. And again, that was short a couple of sampling periods, but not as dramatic of a change as the number of nutrient samples taken in 2020. All of the segments worsened in total phosphorus, in keeping with the story that we saw, which was in line with the river segments as well. One really fantastic thing, and again, pretty sure this comes down to the fact that we did have a reduced nutrient sampling schedule. And this, this may not mean a lot to some of you, but it means a lot to me because usually we see Fs in total nitrogen in the Delaware headwaters and Marshy Hope Creek as well. In 2020, only Broad Creek scored an F. The headwaters and Marshy Hope Creek improved to a D and a D- respectively. But again, you need to put the asterisk next to those grades. I guess the proof will be in the pudding, as they say, when I analyze the 2021 data. That is pretty much all I have to give you an overview of creek waters and results from the 2020 report card. My contact info is here, Beth Wasden at nanticokeriver.org, and my phone number is 443-944-1175. Thank you.
So I will hand it over to Tammy Ransom with Salisbury University. She's also a board member at the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance, and she's going to be sharing information about some of the turtle research that she's been doing in the region.
All right. Oh, hold on. We're testing before. All right, can everybody hear me? Good. All right. So I'm going to be talking about our work with spotted turtles here on Delmarva. And so if you don't know what a spotted turtle looks like, you can look at that little picture. I'll be telling you a little bit more about them. And when I say we, so I work with Dr. Liebgold, Eric Liebgold in the biology department at SU. And so in our lab, we have several graduate students who have gone through working on their master's theses. So Econ, Stephanie, and Amanda have all graduated. And right now, Carson has started work doing radiotelemetry on spotted turtles. And we also have so many undergraduates who also help with this research. So when I say we have done this, we have done that, that's who the we is. And also I should say for, we work with a lot of other folks for site selection, permissions, and Eric deals a lot with all that paperwork stuff. And we've also gotten grants from both SU and an RCN grant to do this work on spotted turtles in Delmarva. And so the goals of our research are, we want to find out, I'll tell you why we want to do this with these turtles in a second, but we want to know how the populations of spotted turtles are faring on Delmarva. And to do that, we have to look at population sizes, possible genetic connectivity between populations, what habitats are these turtles using, where are they, and what are their threats. And before we started this research in 2014, and prior to that, there hasn't been much work done on the spotted turtles in Delmarva. There was a little bit, but not too much. And then, all of this can help answer this question is, can it help to potentially list spotted turtles as an endangered species in the US? Should they be listed as endangered? And I'll tell you a little bit more about this cute little turtle species. So we work on Delmarva. We have sites in Delaware and in Maryland. It's relevant to NantiCon because a couple of our sites are in the Nanticoke Watershed. I'm not going to list any sites because, as you'll learn, people potentially can poach these turtles and sell them for pets. And so we don't want that to happen to our populations. So we tend to be very circumspect when talking about where our actual study sites are. And so spotted turtles, their name, it just means Clemis's tortoise gutata is spot. So it just means spotted turtle. So not a very creative name, but they're cute little turtles. They're only about 5 centimeters from the front of the shell to the back of the shell. They're relatively small. They're long-lived. They can live up to 110 years. Most of the time, if they survive to adulthood, and they don't get smashed by a car or something, they can probably live 60 to 80 years in the wild with no problem. They have delayed maturity, so they don't start breeding until they're 7 to 14 years old, which is kind of long for a wildlife species. And so really, they have relatively high mortality as eggs and juveniles. And so, kind of the goal of conserving this species is to make sure the adults are protected. They also have relatively low fecundity, so their nests are relatively small. They're 3 to 5 eggs. A female, at least around here, we're still trying to collect data for here. In some places further south, they can have 2 clutches a year. Most of the time, they only have a single clutch a year, and sometimes even only once every other year, depending on resources. But in a clutch, there's only 3 to 5 eggs. So they're not producing a lot of offspring. Their offspring are super tiny little snack-sized bites that lots of things might want to eat. Once they get to mature adults, they can still be predated on by things like raccoons and foxes, but they're a little more protected. They might lose a limb or something, but they'll probably be okay. They're found in wetland and swampland habitats, so they are a semi-aquatic freshwater species, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And they're found in eastern North America, so this is their range. They're found all the way from Florida, all the way up to Maine and Canada. And while it might seem like they have a relatively large range, because wetlands and swamplands are so threatened in general, these turtle populations we think are declining. And again, our area is not well studied, but in places where they have been studied, their populations have been decreasing. And again, they're semi-aquatic, so they can be found in terrestrial habitats like this for much of the year. We've found now through our radio telemetry, this is after we've just released one that we've caught, but we've found that sometimes they're really hard to find, like they'll be under poison ivy and all sorts of leaves and stuff, which we didn't know before we started doing the radio telemetry. So their terrestrial habits are relatively unknown thus far. There's been a couple studies, I think one in North Carolina, one in Virginia, but there hasn't been a lot done finding like where they are in terrestrial habitats. What is known is they like these freshwater, often ephemeral ponds, but they'll also be in permanent ponds. They'll also use roadside ditches when they can. They don't like brackish water, so they like fresh water. They will aggregate in these ponds. In Delmarva, they'll usually start sometimes even late February if you get a long warm spell, but usually in March, they'll start aggregating, they'll breed in these ponds, they'll feed in these ponds, and we'll find them through trapping all the way through till June, and then they leave the ponds. And then it's kind of like, where do they go? What habitat are they using? We don't know that much about it. They will come back towards the ponds and kind of bury in the mud and stuff during the winter time. And I mean, they're omnivores. They feed on, they'll eat anything. They'll eat plants, they eat insects, they eat snails, little fish, tadpoles, all sorts of things, anything that can fit in their little mouths. And they're an indicator species. So they live in these freshwater habitats. And so what it means is that they're very susceptible to disturbance. And so when spotted turtles disappear, that's an indication of an ecosystem out of whack. And if you talk to folks around here who know turtles, spotted turtles used to be super common. Like if you go to a pond and you see painted turtles out sunning themselves, those used to be spotted turtles, 50, 60 years ago. We don't see that now. Most people, unless you're really looking, you haven't seen a spotted turtle. I hadn't seen a spotted turtle. I think I'd seen them once before I started studying them. They are there. They're just not as common probably as they once were. And they are listed on the IUCN Red List as an endangered species. And that's because, again, not many studies have been done, but studies that have been done for long-term studies have found a 50% decline. And when I say worldwide, it's in Eastern North America, in populations that have been studied in the last decade or two. So, I mean, that's a huge decline in populations. There's been one long-term study in Maryland by Hunter Howell out at Towson, and he found a 49% decline in his population in central Maryland. And so it seems like many of the populations have been having sharp declines. Again, we've only been studying them since 2014 here. There is some other data, but we suspect that they're also declining here. But again, we want to look more about how their populations are doing. All right, and so other than being indicator species, it's important to study these because, like other species, they are threatened by habitat loss and habitat fragmentation, which we have a lot of around here. Road mortality, which not only impacts them, but other migrating reptiles and amphibians. So those are all general to lots of other species as well. And then what's specific to this species is the pet trade. So if you look online, the 2,000 might be a little high, but you can definitely, if you try to buy a spotted turtle, it's going to cost you like $400. And when you buy them, they're supposed to be captive bred spotted turtles if they're going to cross state lines, but oftentimes they are not. And when I went to a turtle conference, they showed a video of a natural resource officer pulling somebody over who was suspicious. They pulled him over, they looked, and then when they looked in his backpack, they just started pulling out spotted turtles. He had 60 spotted turtles in a backpack. And as you'll see, that can be a whole population of spotted turtles. And so, again, we try to be very circumspect. I don't know particularly of any poaching around here, but it is possible. They're super cute. People want them as pets. People in Asia want them as pets. So anyway, you have to be careful. They are worth some money. And like I said before, once their populations decline, it's difficult for their populations to bounce back because they have late sexual maturity, they have small clutch sizes and low fecundity. And so they already have low survival for juveniles and the egg stage. And if the adult stages are also getting hit, it can be really hard for the population to bounce back. And so, like I said, here on Delmarva, we have a deficiency in data. We've actually collected a lot of data, but where are they found? Where are the populations? What are those population sizes? What factors are influencing those populations in terms of habitat and things like that? One thing we're also interested in is we've set up camera traps to look at predation rates for juveniles versus adults. And so those are all things that our lab is doing. And we also, I mentioned we had received an RCN grant. And so our group is collecting data as part of this RCN grant. So we're part of a group that's assessing spotted turtle populations throughout their range from Maine all the way down to Florida. And this is a collaborative effort of a bunch of different research groups, the Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Program. And by collecting data, everybody is collecting data in the same way. And doing that using these standardized protocols, we've been doing this the last few years. It stopped last year. We and other researchers can better help with spotted turtle conservation, because then you're not comparing apples to oranges. Everybody's collecting the data in the same way. So you're comparing apples to apples, and we can get a better sense of not only how they're doing on Delmarva, but how they're doing throughout their whole range. All right, and so I'm just going to talk very briefly about what we do. So we have to trap turtles, we have standardized protocols, and we do them so that we can use mark recapture programs to estimate population sizes. These are painted turtles in here. That's Econ, our graduate student. And these are spotted turtles here, but we bait our traps with sardines. We catch our spotted turtles. You have to check them every day when they're out there. And then we give each turtle a unique mark. A benefit of marking them this way is they're less valuable to the pet trade if they have a notch in them, because they're not pristine. But each turtle has a unique code, and we have a numbering system. So if these are the only marks on this turtle, this would be turtle. This is scoot 1 and scoot 2 right here. It's in the ones place. So this would be turtle number 3 if those are the only marks. And we can mark up to 9,999 turtles individually in a population. And next time we catch that turtle, we'll know who it is. And the marking, they probably don't like it when we use a little triangular file, but it doesn't hurt them at all. It's like filing your nails. So they're okay. And then we've also been collecting genetic data. So we collect either blood sample, well, we collect both usually, blood samples or buccal swabs as well. For the RCN grant, we collected blood samples, we sent those away. And then we also use that data to look at connectivity within our population. I think we're done doing that now, but again, that data is useful for the larger program. And more recently, we've just started last June to put radio transmitters. And so Eric had an undergraduate that he was working with last summer who put transmitters on some turtles so that we can see then where the individuals are going. So this is answering different questions, not population level questions, but where do individuals go, what habitats they're using at different times of the year. And so then we go out and track them. And again, very general results. I could go into any of these in more detail from the different projects that we've got going on. But in general, our populations are relatively small. So we've actually got 5 main populations that we've been studying. This is only 4 of them. And we've individually caught about over 500 turtles at these sites. And we've got a couple other sites as well. And you know, like these are not marked turtles, but based on the mark recapture, what estimated population sizes are. And most of our populations are pretty small. And again, if one of these populations, especially a small one, gets hit by a poacher or something comes through, they got a lot of saltwater intrusion, that can really impact populations. So we have a couple of relatively healthy populations, and then most of the other populations are relatively small. When we looked at the genetic connectivity, we were actually surprised that there was quite a bit of genetic connectivity among our populations, even though they were pretty far away. And I think the range was like 18 kilometers to be considered a population, but there was still connectivity even further than that. But the main thing in our model was that saltwater avoidance was affecting the population structure. And obviously with sea level rise around here, we have several of our populations that are likely to be isolated and impacted with saltwater intrusion in the future. I'll try to wrap this up. And then, so mesopredators are also common at our sites. We've got raccoons and foxes and things, and we've got camera traps at all our sites that we've been looking at. And we've been monitoring predator-caused injuries on turtles and found that compared to our other common turtle species, mud turtles, painted turtles, snapping turtles, spotted turtles were more likely to have predator-caused injuries. And so we're still looking at why that might be. I mean, they're less aquatic than mud and painted turtles. They're smaller than snapping turtles. And so this means that they're escaping from predators, but they are losing limbs and showing evidence of injuries. And we're only catching the ones that got away, right? But we see more injuries on spotted turtles. And so just concluding, I mean, we love doing this research and we're going to continue to do it. Spotted turtle populations on Delmarva, we haven't been studying them long enough to definitively say they're declining, but we know several populations are pretty low. We know that saltwater intrusion is going to be impacting them in the future, and that mesopredators also seem to have an impact, and mesopredator numbers are up because of anthropogenic effects, edge effects, and things like that, habitat fragmentation. Our group feels that federal listing is an important for the conservation of the species in the future. And looking forward, you know, not just our group, but the overall group can talk about how we can combat these threats. Are there population recovery strategies that can be done to help this species, not just on Delmarva, but throughout their range? And with that, sorry, one more thing, the one more next step. They are going up to where a decision will be made whether they should be listed in fiscal year 2023. So we've been sending our data to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We're continuing to send some additional things this spring, and then that determination will be made. And with that, I can take any questions.
Over to Paul Sturm, who is our next presenter. He's with Ridge to Reefs, and he's going to be sharing basically some projects they've done that are agricultural projects. And so I'll hand it over to you, Paul. Here.
So my name is Paul Sturm. I'm the executive director of Ridge to Reefs, and I'm going to talk about farmers going above and beyond on conservation, and also really some of the incentives that are available now to farmers. You know, I think historically in the past, there's cost share involved, or cost share was a type of incentive that, but now I think there's, you know, there's even cash payments or, you know, pay for performance, where reducing nutrients, you know, is starting to have a value in the marketplace. And the state of Maryland has recently, you know, started a new program. So again, we want to talk about some of the great things that farmers are doing in the watershed, and then also some opportunities that exist moving forward into the future. And Ridge to Reefs is a nonprofit organization working on water and food security really around the world. We work in the Chesapeake Bay, but we also work in the Caribbean and in the Pacific, including Hawaii, American Samoa, Palau, and places like Puerto Rico. Let's see. So again, in this talk, I'm going to talk about, you know, some examples of farmers going above and beyond, and then some of the incentives that are out there in the marketplace, including funding or payments. I think another incentive is really improving soil health on individual farms, and really investing in soil health that can help really give good fertility of the soil, you know, for a long duration of time. And then carbon trading also is kind of coming online, and some farmers are starting to participate in carbon marketplaces and being paid for sequestering carbon. And then I'm also going to talk about kind of some emerging opportunities where I think there's some unique ways to save, reduce on fertilizer budgets and things like that, by investing in soil health. So one of the farms that I'm going to talk about is Layton's Chance, and Joe Layton is, you know, the proprietor there and the farmer there. And this is a location where we implemented what's called a denitrifying bioreactor. And I'll show kind of how a denitrifying bioreactor works. It basically either takes water from a drain tile that's helping to drain farm fields that may historically have been more inundated during wet weather, or it can take water from a ditch essentially and then run it through basically a wood chip bioreactor. And what the wood shavings do, or the wood chips do, is they provide a habitat for denitrifying bacteria, which are what reduces nitrogen, or particularly nitrate, in nature. So it's kind of a souped up version of a like a riparian buffer, where a lot of times a riparian buffer will have denitrifying layers, but you have to have anoxic conditions to have the right conditions for these bacteria to flourish. And that's not always present in riparian buffers. Some of ours are more oxic and therefore don't remove nitrogen, particularly in sandy soils. So denitrifying bioreactors are particularly important in areas that have sandy soils. But the idea is to have water move through, to have this area be inundated, and to have water move through it between, say, 12 and 20 hours. And what that enables to have happen is for the vast majority of the nitrate to be removed and turned into N2 gas. This is just another kind of picture of what that looks like. You see the nitrate in the tile drain. You see the wood chips, and the bacteria are down there. And then we're also able to sort of cover these areas, and you can see we're covering this with soil over on the right. And then, grass or, cover crops or other things could be planted in those areas. This is just some data from a couple of projects. This is Mason's Heritage Farm in Ruthsburg. And you can see very high removal rates for nitrate. So it's a very beneficial practice. And this is also a practice where farmers can potentially see some return on investment by participating and doing these types of practices, and then receiving a payment every year for, say, the next 8 or 10 years. And I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Oakland View Farm in Ridgely, Maryland. This happens to be a dairy farm. And you can see also very high removal rates for nitrate for the water that's going through the bioreactor. Another farmer that I thought that we would highlight is Trey Hill. And I think one of the things that's unique about Trey, he farms a tremendous amount of acres, over 13,000 or 15,000 acres. And then he's also one of the first farmers in the region who's participating in carbon trading. And so for each acre, he's estimating that they sequester a ton of carbon per acre. And maybe the payment is $15 or $20 per acre. And certainly it may cost them something to sequester that carbon, but they've really made it a part of their practice in terms of having practices that sequester carbon. And so, on 13,000 acres, certainly an extra $15 or $20 an acre, ends up in a tremendous amount of money. So there's certainly an incentive here, both from the environment's perspective, but also from, the bottom line of the farmer. It enables them to invest more in their operations, in their personnel, et cetera. So a few of the tenets that Trey uses are continuous no-till, really not tilling the land at all, using cover crops, often multi-species cover crops. I think that the health of the soil is really benefited by multi-species. each plant contributes stuff back to the soil, nutrients, and benefits sort of the environment in the soil itself. And so I think that that's an important part of that, and there's good research that documents that. The other thing that Trey has done a lot of is take certain lands that aren't very productive, particularly areas that are kind of wet, difficult to farm. He's not really making a profit on those areas. Even some of the waterway areas, he's turning back into wetlands, and really improving the filtration capacity of the farm before things really are outletted to the stream. And certainly there's funding to help do those things, but it's also good business sense to not be spending a lot of money on inputs for farms or for land that's not really getting you any return on your investment. So a couple things, they realized that by having living roots in the ground, that they were no longer tilling into brown fields. And if you think about this, this is really important. They're tilling, or they're growing into healthy soils that are already growing things and that have a healthy biological community and even fungal community associated with them. And so as a result, I think that their yields are improved by growing in healthy soil and maintaining healthy soil and maintaining cover year round. And so just as an example, with some of the cover crop regimes that he's using, they have over 10 species that are out there contributing basically root exudates back into the soil that benefit the health of the soil, benefit the microbial community in the soil, as well as the fungal community. And I'll talk more about why that's important. So this is some research from Dr. Johnson, who's a professor at New Mexico State. And what they've shown is when you use mixed species of cover crops, you tend to have a much higher productivity in the plants and the crops that you're growing on that soil. And so he saw a 32% higher productivity. And so that means the biomass that's being grown there's more 32% higher amount of biomass, which equates to more grain or more corn or more soybeans that are yielded off of that land. So particularly important. And this just shows, this is a wetland project that Ridge to Reefs worked on with Trey at his home farm, where, this originally was just a kind of a grassed waterway. And, we worked together to turn that into habitat that's beneficial. There's beneficial pollinators in here. You need bees and you need a healthy ecosystem around your farms to help with fertilization and other things. So it's really kind of a win-win situation. And often there's funding to put these areas back into wetlands. So it doesn't have to be a significant cost to the producer. And just wanted to talk about some of the incentives that are out there right now. There's a Clean Water Commerce Act that's coming on board right now in the next few weeks, I'm told. And it's really kind of a pay-per-performance model for nutrient reductions. So as I mentioned in the past, farmers often would get cost share, but they really wouldn't, they would kind of maybe break even or potentially lose a little money by participating in some of these conservation programs. And now I think it's more of a pay-per-performance model where they could get revenue from implementing those conservation practices, say like a denitrifying bioreactor or improving their soil health and things like that. and get revenue from that for the next, say, 8 or 10 years, and perhaps longer. I think we're still waiting to see, you know, how the program rolls out. In addition, the carbon market pays $15 to $20 per ton, which is, and I think a ton can be sequestered on an acre. So, you know, that's for a small farmer with not a lot of acres, that wouldn't add to necessarily a lot of money. But again, even with the soil health improvements, the next thing result in higher yields and lower costs for the farmers and higher profits on a per acre basis. So I'll talk a little bit about what I see is really an emerging opportunity in terms of there's what's called fungal dominated composts that folks are creating across the country and really around the world. And so part of the idea is that you're inoculating soil with beneficial microbes and fungi that were part of how soil was made historically. You know, from an evolutionary perspective, I think that we probably had mostly rocks early on, and you had fungi and lichen and other things that essentially broke down those rocks and made soil over millions and millions of years. And so having those as a component of your soil helps to liberate those phytonutrients, nutrients that our crops need. And also it makes for healthier crops in terms of both from when people eat them, as well as more resistance to disease. So just in terms of the fertilizer cost trends, this is from December 2021. And what we've seen more recently, because of constrictions in the marketplace and less availability, you know, shortages, those sorts of things related to COVID and other things, you know, essentially we've seen a doubling of the price, or more than a doubling of the price of nitrogen per pound, you know, from say 2020 to 2022. And so I think there's a real financial argument to invest in soil health and invest in some of these practices that are lower cost and really end up with better soil health. So how beam compost is made, it's essentially like other types of compost, but what's unique, so it has a manure source, fine wood chips, straw or green waste, other things like that. But the idea here is that you keep it in an aerobic process. And so you keep air flowing through this compost. And also you keep it wet, you keep it moist from the beginning. And so maybe a minute or two a day, there's water that's put onto these compost systems in order to keep them moist, and also to, you know, at the same time, you're keeping them aerobic. Because anaerobic, you tend to have more of a bacteria dominated system rather than a fungal system. So this is just on a small scale. This is an example of what's called a Johnson-Su bioreactor that's keeping this compost pile aerobic. And this is even beneficial for those home gardeners out there and things like that. One of the challenges is this does take a while. It takes often like a year to create this compost, this really great compost for a fungal dominated system. This is being done on a larger scale. This is actually in a greenhouse in the Midwest, and you can see those holes. That's where essentially they had things to keep that pile aerated. And then so they're able to make this on a large scale and then essentially create like a compost tea and apply it when they you know, do their corn or soybeans or kind of garden type approaches. So, and this is a really important graphic, and this is really, it's called the soil, you know, like thinking about the soil food web. And what this is showing as you have increased amounts of fungal biomass, you have additional biomass that's in the field. And so the more fungally dominated your soil is, the more you're going to be able to produce on that land. And this goes for all types of vegetation on our planet. So, you know, in a tropical rainforest, you have a very fungal dominated system. In other forests that are very productive, you have a fungal dominated system. And really what they're showing is that just 2 pounds of this per acre put into a tea is the same as putting, say, 140 pounds of nitrogen on your field. You have the same result by creating this soil biology, and that's so important. And so this is just a study. This is a study from the Midwest, and you had a conventional farmer, or they had a farm, and they were comparing these things side by side. And what they showed is that conventionally, they were barely able to break even on 217 bushels per acre, putting 256 pounds per acre, units per acre of nitrogen. But when they used beam compost plus 15% of nitrogen, 32 probably pounds per nitrogen per acre, they were able to make $88 an acre. And then with their just using beam compost, essentially 2 pounds per acre, they didn't get as much yield, but they were still able to make $60 per acre, where they were really only able to break even in that particular growing season in the past. So with that, I'll open it up for questions, but also put our contact information, and you can we're also www.ridgetoreefs.org. So if anybody would like to reach out.
Our next presenter is Tim Rosen, who's also going to be talking about some different agricultural projects. So Tim is with Shore Rivers, and he's going to be presenting Advancing Drainage Water Management in Delaware.
Thanks for everyone's patience for the last 2 hours and 10 minutes, because I know ag drainage is everyone's favorite topic. Obviously, it's my favorite topic. And we've been working on ag drainage in Maryland and Delaware now for the past almost a decade. And I work for Shore Rivers. I'm the ag restoration, the director of ag and restoration at Shore Rivers. And I'll be discussing projects that we're completing in Delaware. And as you can see, this is a rather large partnership we have in Delaware. The funding for design of these projects was through NRCS. The funding for implementation came through the Chesapeake Bay Implementation Grant administered by DNREC. We've had help from Kent Conservation District. We had good private partnerships with ADS, which is a pipe supplier, Allegheny Farm Services, which is a drainage contractor from New York, as well as AgriDrain Corporation, who creates a lot of the structures that we use in our projects. So we all know that drainage is incredibly important, especially on Delmarva. This is one of my favorite images. This is from the harvest in 2020. Combine going right across the field, and it was so wet that year that the bottom fell out, and you can see buried the combine. In 2020, this was a really common occurrence. And some of this has to do with the fact that when farmers need to harvest, they can't wait for field conditions to be perfect. So drainage is incredibly important for production. Something that we also forget about is that for agricultural soil health, we need to have aerated soils. So you need to have good drainage. So in order to do this, this is just a brief background, we use drainage tile. And drainage tile is just perforated pipe that allows excess soil moisture to enter the pipe, and then it takes that from the field and puts it right into a ditch or stream. So you're able to lower that water table to increase soil aeration, to increase crop production and allow you to get across your field earlier, faster, and without any kind of issues. And ag drainage is, in our region, is incredibly old. Our first tax-funded ditch was in Maryland in 1789. And as we all know, in Delaware, we have extensive ditching to maintain our landscape, as well as infield drainage, like I'm showing here. With ag drainage, all the positives I just gave you, there's some negatives. Obviously, it's changing hydrology. We are taking soils that were probably wet naturally and making them dry. We're concentrating dissolved nutrients and pesticides into pipes and putting them into ditches and streams. We're reducing the effectiveness of any kind of manure management practices, such as injecting manure, because now we're putting manure closer to pipes. And finally, we're circumventing ecosystem services by bypassing riparian areas. So you could have tile drainage in your field. That pipe is going to outlet to that stream or ditch. So putting a buffer around that field effectively does nothing, because all the nutrients are going through that pipe rather than through that buffer. So we know there's negatives about ag drainage. And in order to address these, we now have what we call conservation drainage. And it's kind of a comprehensive way of addressing all the issues that I just mentioned with tools that we've developed over the past few decades. This is just a definition from Minnesota Department of Ag that just refers to several emerging technologies that you're trying to address the negatives of ag drainage while maintaining the benefits of it. Because obviously we can't stop drainage because we need that to grow our food, but we want to make sure that we address it so we're not having dissolved nutrients just enter our waterways directly. And when we talk about the bigger picture is that, you know, across the world, we have to really strive for sustainable intensification of our ag production systems because, and this is really true for our region, we need to produce more food with the same or less land with less environmental cost. And when we look at conservation drainage, it checks some of those boxes because we're managing water as a resource, we're building that farm resiliency, and it's compatible with water quality and climate change goals. So conservation drainage allows us to sustainably intensify agriculture so that we have food and fiber for future generations. And these are just some practices when we talk about conservation drainage. We do new designs. We use something we call blind inlets in the field to get surface water off. It's basically a French drain. We're managing water. We're putting in treatment wetlands. As Paul mentioned, we're doing denitrifying bioreactors at the outlet of these systems. And finally, we're using those riparian areas that we were bypassing more effectively by creating what we call saturated buffers. So we're actually diverting water from drainage tile lines underneath those buffers now and resaturating them. What I really want to talk about though is drainage water management. And the idea of drainage water management is that we can easily put what we call water control structure at the outlet of a tile and manage the timing and amount of water discharge from the tile system. To do this, we need a pattern tile within the field. We need flat topography to get the most benefit. And here's what a pattern tile looks like. So you can see all those lines there in the field are drainage tile lines that connect to a water control structure, which is in the lower right corner of that slide. And what we're doing with that water control structure is just managing how much water is being released. And by doing that, we can increase yields by 3 to 5%. We reduce nitrate losses by greater than 30%. And overall, we're reducing drainage intensity. And this is a nice graphic from AgriDrain to demonstrate what it looks like by managing that system. So you can see it starts in January and February. We have all the stop logs in that water control structure to back up the water and not allow it to leave the field. So we're effectively raising that water table, holding it back, keeping all the nutrients in the field. And then when March comes around, we're lowering that water table for planting. And then between March and October, we're managing that water table for crop production. So we don't want to lose all of our water because the crops need it, but we need to have the water table at a depth that we don't cause any of the roots to die off. So you can see we're managing it for that root growth through the growing season. Then finally, November comes around, put all the stop logs back in, make that water table increase again because we don't need drainage through the winter. So it's just a smarter way of managing our drainage underneath our fields. And then looking at drainage water management across the Chesapeake Bay, Delaware and the eastern shore of Maryland are two zones that we have a lot of acres where we could implement this. You can see the red there in Sussex County. We're looking at probably 60% of the fields there that could have some sort of drainage water management. So there's a lot of potential to implement this practice in Delaware as well as Maryland. And to do this in Delaware, we have a contract from NRCS, and that contract is with one of our partners, Ecosystem Services Exchange. They're a technical service provider that is able to design these systems. So Ecosystem Services Exchange, in partnership with Shore Rivers, we've conducted outreach, training, and design of projects. Shore Rivers under this contract is also helping with landowner coordination and project management. And it's just not about designing. We would like to get these things installed. So on the next end, we've been looking at different either federal sources of funding or working with our state partners for project construction. So it's a two-step process, and it's so far been fairly effective to increase drainage water management in the state of Delaware. And here are two examples. They're both in the Nanticoke. So project one is in Sussex County, and this discharges to the main stem of the Nanticoke. We're managing just over 17 acres of the field using one water control structure. And looking at the estimated nutrient reductions by doing this, it's about just over 450 pounds of nitrogen. And Paul mentioned that, you know, we can put dollar amounts to these numbers and better understand what it looks like for the investment side of this. And drainage water management has a practice life standard of 10 years, but we all know that these drainage systems are going to be working in our landscape for over 40 years. So 10 years is just kind of a federal standard, but we know that really the life of these projects is 40 years plus. So at the 10-year mark, this project cost about $9.82 per pound of nitrogen. When we extend it out to that 40-year number, we're looking at $2.45. So it's a very cost-effective practice to achieve some of our nutrient reduction goals. The next site in Kent County, Delaware, this goes into the Marshy Hope. We're managing, this site is I think 36 acres. Someone could probably quickly do the math on that screen for me. The estimate nutrient reduction is about 507 pounds. We're looking at $13 per pound at the 10-year mark for this project. And at the 40-year mark, we're at $3.27 per pound of nitrogen. So very cost effective for achieving our nitrogen reduction goals. So taking this a step further, using the typical structures, all manual management. So you have to have someone go out there to adjust those stop logs in that water control structure to manage it properly. With the understanding that not everyone's going to have the time to do that, AgriDrain has come up with a system where we now automate these structures. And we did the first automated drainage water management project in this region at our Kent County project in the Marshy Hope watershed. And this just shows you that setup. So that's basically that solar panel in that little box. That's all the technology in there to open and close the stop log at the bottom of the structure to manage that water table. And on the right here is just the hydrograph that shows you the water level and then the operation of that system. So in the middle there, I manually went online, opened the system, drained the water down, and then I closed it back up before a rainstorm just to make sure that the system was working. And you can see how that water table immediately responded to those actions. So it's nice. You could be sitting at your house and adjust your structures to manage the water table within your field. So this is kind of the next generation of managing agricultural water for production and water quality. So new projects that are going on the Nanticoke, we have 3 of them that we just submitted for review for funding. 2 projects are in Sussex County. They both go to the Nanticoke, and then the 3rd project in Kent County that goes to the Marshy Hope. And all those projects combined are reducing nitrogen by 2,227 pounds per year. Looking at the watershed as a whole, so what's the potential in the Nanticoke to implement drainage water management? And this was just a tabletop study that I completed on soils that were first on ag land, and second were flat, and third had high water table. So it was basically perfect setups for drainage water management. And across the watershed, there's roughly 56,200 acres that we can manage. And putting this as an average reduction, looking at, this is from the Bay program. I averaged it because it's variable for every sub watershed in Nanticoke, but overall we're looking at drainage water management having about 17 pounds per acre reduction. So if you implemented drainage water management across all those acres, that's about 955,000 pounds of nitrogen reduced through drainage water management if we implement it across the Nanticoke. So there's a lot of potential to implement this practice throughout the watershed on these ag acres. So finally, the idea behind drainage water management as well as conservation drainage is increasing yields, building in long-term resiliency within our farm sector, cost share the conservation, work with our farm partners and our federal and state funding to make these things a reality. And in the end, we can achieve mutual goals of cleaner waters and productive farm fields. So if you want conservation drainage in Delaware, just contact us directly or contact NRCS or contact your local soil conservation district. In Maryland, same route can be done. They also have a state cost share program in Maryland to implement these sort of projects.
Our next speaker is Darrell Kohler. He's with EA Engineering. Darrell, if you want to take over, control the screen. And he's going to be talking about a project near the Nanticoke, the Graham Avenue Submerged Gravel Wetland.
Well, real quick, before I get started, my name is Darrell Kohler. I'm an engineer with EA Engineering, but also joining is the town of Berlin, and the town administrator, Jeff Fleetwood, is with us, as well as the director of water resources, Jamie Latcham. And I can offer, Jeff, if you want to say any brief introductory words.
Just a couple things, Dawn. I appreciate it. What I'd like to share with the group, what little, and I'm going to be very blunt. I'm a right to the point kind of guy. I've done a little bit of research on the organization that we're tied into today. You guys are to be commended for what you do. I know you struggle for resources, as we all do, but I've been told of some good things that you guys have done. So it kind of excites me to link up with an organization that's done good stuff, because I want to believe that the town of Berlin has done some good stuff, and that good stuff that we've done. I'm not going to go into the detail because obviously I'm not qualified really to talk about it, other than from I call it a normal human being of the United States of America perspective. But I want to thank the partners that we've been blessed with over the years, and one is Darrell himself and the folks at EA, Kate Patton and Steve Farr. Partnerships, are important, and I look forward to the venture that we're about to begin with, hopefully with Nanticoke. The project that Darrell is going to share with you is one that we as a town are very proud of. It showed immediate results when it was finished. As you're well aware, I overheard a little bit of the conversation before we chimed in about farmers needing drainage, and they're going to find drainage. I absolutely echo that. We're going to do the same thing, but we want to do it right. So the gentleman with me is Jamie Latcham. He serves as the town of Berlin's water resources director. And this project, a lot of the grunt labor, if you will, Jamie is to be applauded for that, because he pretty much was the gopher and the go-to guy for that. So I look forward to this 15, 20 minutes with you folks.
Excellent, Jeff. I'll take it from here. I appreciate it. Yeah, this project, it's the Graham Avenue Submerged Gravel Wetland Project. Let me go to the next slide. So we've been looking in this area for some time. This is a very nuisance flood prone area. And then, so in 2019, the town identified an area on Graham Avenue that's town owned. It's actually a former electric substation, and it's in the Hudson Branch watershed. Town owned, just an ideal area to receive drainage from a couple different directions, and just really look at a water quality system in a submerged gravel wetland project. So it just was an ideal area that was not being used anymore, town owned. So we approached the Chesapeake Bay Trust, a grant application with them, and teamed up with the Maryland Coastal Bays Program for an application and was awarded $75,000. And that's where this project kicked off and started design. This photo here, you can see that is actually on Nelson Street, and then the project is into the screen. So you can see how much standing water here, and that's probably after a couple hours of a rainfall event. So the flooding reduction was significant, and the opportunity with the Chesapeake Bay Trust and them coming through with the project award. So the project itself, it's 2/3 of an acre, with about 1/5 of that is the actual facility acre, and then the actual storage of about 15,000 cubic feet. The project actually has 2 forebays. It's unique. We have a forebay on each side because we have drainage coming from Old Ocean City Boulevard, which is to the north or upper left hand of the screen here, and then from Graham Avenue itself, bleeding from the street, and then kind of gravitates towards the center through some micro topography and an outlet into the existing storm drain conveyance system. So the facility itself, has gravel windows. That's to promote the vertical percolation and then get into the conveyance system. The micro topography that I mentioned just offers varying plant life species and just more of aesthetic appeal to it. And as well as we kept off the property line a little bit because the town still had their overhead electric on the one side to the north of the page and had to remain access to it. So there's a little bit of a drive aisle along that side. A little bit more about the project. I know it might be tough to read on the screen, but the area itself, it receives almost 11 acres in drainage area. And of that is a little over 3.5 acres of impervious area treated. So, a nice sizable drainage area. And this is more of an artistic illustration that we use for some signage that provides some details. And so you can see where, Graham Avenue, we have drainage coming off of there. Here's the Graham Avenue, comes into this forebay. And then Old Ocean City Boulevard, the state highway ditch along that and receives into this forebay here, meanders around and gets into the outfall piping and structure. So in addition to the flood reduction, which was important, this was driven by water quality as well. And our calculations demonstrated that on an annual basis, we were estimating removal of 165 pounds of nitrogen, about 16 pounds of phosphorus, and 8,400 pounds of total suspended solids. This detail here provides a little bit more of a cross-section view of it. So you can see the forebays on each side. You can see the gravel windows, the layering of the planing soil, sand, pea gravel, and then gravel underneath. And you can, on top of the screen, the elevation of the land prior to the installation of submerged gravel letting. So quite a bit of material had to come out of here. And that's where the town, under Jamie Latcham and the Water Resources Department, and Jamie, in equipment himself, excavating and removing a lot of material. And that's really how this project became economically feasible, was the collaboration of the town and a couple grant opportunities. While it was initially grant funded by the Chesapeake Bay Trust, through the Maryland Coastal Bays, actually we were able to use some additional funding they were able to acquire through the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. So I was talking a little bit ahead of my slide here, but here's a couple photos. So here's the bottom left, this photo, you can see how much excavation was going on. And this is town staff. This is Jamie and itself and some coworkers getting in there and removing this and taking it to another town-owned site. We had to go down 8, 10, 12 feet. So to get down to some sandy material and then build those layers up. So aside from the town constructed part, they actually contracted out the conveyance connection and the stormwater structure. So there's a structure in the gravel wetland itself that receives this conveyance piping, and it connects to the Nelson Avenue system. So a total of, I believe, 3 structures were installed, and then this piping along Nelson to connect to the existing system. And an added bonus, when we did some test pitting to evaluate the site prior to excavation, but when we get down to true depth, we found a little bit more sandy soil. So, we were still able to have this facility function as a submerged gravel wetland, but we had some added drainage bonus on one side. So it was actually able to take on and receive and infiltrate a bit more volume of water than we anticipated. So it actually performed a little bit better than we had estimated, and we see that now under rainfall events. So I mentioned a little bit about, the stakeholders that came to the table for this project. So we got the initial funding of the $75,000 from the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and that was a team effort with the Maryland Coastal Bays Program and EA. And the Maryland Coastal Bays really, they did the public outreach. They held informational meetings. They did volunteer events for the planting once, we got all the media layers in place. But funding was, we realized during construction that it was becoming pretty tight. And town staff, even though they had the capabilities to do it, were really strapped for resources because they were just obviously being pulled in multiple different directions. So the Maryland Coastal Bays Program actually said, hey, we have a grant with Maryland Department of Natural Resources that I believe we can utilize and tap into that for this project. So through the Maryland Coastal Bays, DNR actually provided $55,000 for this project. So in addition to town staff and their dedicated in-kind services of staff and equipment, they actually, out of their capital budget, provided $45,000. So the total project cost of $175,000, still a pretty good price tag for the project that we did. I believe if we had bid this out in its entirety, would have probably been closer to the 250 range, maybe even up, who knows with today's dollars. So project schedule, back in 2018, we were completing the design, and then we used that design to utilize for a grant application, along with the combined efforts of the town of Berlin and the Maryland Coastal Bays Program. So we finalized that up with permitting in 2019. Late 2019, we were actually received the grant award. We put out a bid selection for the piping and inlet structures component in September, and then the construction was from March to September in 20, with a project closeout in December of 2020. There's a little bit of time lag in there because of planting season, and we got construction done well before this project closeout and construction completion date, but a little bit of time because we wanted to plant the trees, shrubs, and grasses, in a decent window, which was the fall of 2020. So with that, the Maryland Coastal Bays Program actually honored the town of Berlin with their Gold Star Award, and had a nice little benefit. And here in the photo is, on the left is Kevin Smith. He's the director of the Maryland Coastal Bays Program, honoring the town of Berlin. And there you can, in the center, you can see Jamie Lasham, who's the director of water resources, Jeff Fleetwood, who's the town administrator, and myself. So it was a true honor to witness that and be a part of that, and help see the town earn that award for a really cool project that they utilizing a old substation, and to kind of completely flip this around for an environmental quality project. So the project, as it stands now, this photo was actually taken just the last week. There's a nice project sign there that provides a summary of the project. A lot of the information is in this presentation. But in addition, there's a little QR code sign. And if you go and you just scan that, that'll take you to the Maryland Coastal Bays site with a more detailed story and in depth of the project. So it's cool. I mean, the town proudly displays it. It's just been well received. It's functioning well, and just a real cool story.
Okay, Gina Bloodsworth is our next presenter. Bloodworth. She's a professor at Salisbury University.
Hi, guys. I wanted to let you know about a course that we decided to do through environmental studies and geography both, because there just is not enough focus on lawns. And it's very easy for environmental students and geography students to get swept up in big global issues. Everybody's talking about global issues and they forget to look just right outside their front door. So this is a class that will help students refocus their lens and look at lawns so that they can begin to think through the sustainability aspects, the biodiversity aspects, the cultural, historic, the possibly not thought of societal baggage that comes with landscape design and why we do what we do. So I wanted to show you a little bit about what these guys get to do. This is a seminar that also has 5 field tours. So we begin, because I'm running it in the spring, we're not jumping into the field. When I ran it in the fall, we started in the field and then we did readings as the weather got worse. So the idea is to historically embed how lawns really began and what's the difference between a yard and a lawn, and how do we view the space outside our houses and the immense amount of money and advertising and cultural priority we put on the lawn. So this is a rundown from my syllabus about the readings, and every week I give them an essay question to write on meditatively, a couple of pages. They do get 2 take-home exams, and then a quarter of the grade has to do with really getting out in the field and observing lawns, measuring lawns, seeking biodiversity. I've got them doing a little transect and species count in a lawn of their choice to see if all those blades of grass are really the same grass or if there isn't hidden biodiversity, and then look at native species versus invasives. What does it take in terms of technology to care for lawns? Just an overall multidisciplinary look at lawns and their impacts. So how do we get from this to thinking about this? The supersized capacity of lawns is also a trend that follows suburbia that I talk about. I want students to think about multiple sizes and scales, but also multiple regions of the country. What does a lawn mean in the mountains? How are lawns looked at In the deep south, what about areas that are more urban than rural? What about kind of regional specificity like the Pacific Northwest? This is a tiny house with a tiny lawn, but powerful. What about the deserts? Does lawn mean the same thing if you have 12 inches of precipitation a year? What about different aesthetics? I also have them really start to engage with, why do we think the way we think? And part of that includes spending an entire week looking at advertising and the lawn and how we have been seduced into some of the ideas that we have. Part of this is technology, but part of this is clearly also advertising. And it has been wildly entertaining to see how students respond to this part of the class. I will just say, when they start to recognize there is a huge industry, an empire of lawn maintenance, they really begin to think through, are they expressing cultural values with a lawn, or are they being commercially motivated to compete with their neighbors? So how do you really look at, what is a lawn telling us about ourselves, and what does it tell us about our values and how we see our relationship within the community? The enormous array of tools that we now use can be extremely pricey, but also speaks to a kind of increasingly compartmentalized and expensive reality for taking care of lawns. The other thing that I wanted to show is the cultural variety. How do lawns look if you come from a different cultural perspective? So is this really a lawn, or is this where leprechauns live? What if you are in an equatorial climate zone? Does lawn transformed into compound mean something different? What if you are on the edge of the savanna? How people around the world interact with and interface with the nature around them, and what it is that is transmitted about our cultural values in different ways of keeping lawn is really endlessly fascinating when you start to look at it. This is an inside of a Japanese house, and the thing that is classically Japanese is less is more. And the space that is not occupied has just as much meaning in Japanese culture as space that is occupied. So the spacing between things becomes extremely important in ways that cluttered Americans just really don't pay attention to. They do the same thing in the outer space that is the semi-public, semi-private lawn. And Japanese yards focus immensely on proportionality and where things are located and the space between them. So I wanted to give you guys a stronger sense of how we discuss lawns, largely because this is a really big aggregate impact on our environment, but it's very little studied. When I started putting this class together, it's amazing how few academic sources from any discipline I could find. And I put it together largely out of self-interest and not through one specific disciplinary perspective. So that allows for a look at media, a look at culture, a look at scale and geography, a look at the embedded values, but also students are really getting to learn about their very local environments. My guys hadn't ever seen desert adaptation to vegetation before. They hadn't really explored the mountains, except for Appalachia. There has been, through the field exercises, a definitely sharper observational component. When I have the students go out and look at lawns, I'm having them document all of the visceral elements that are compact within a yard. What does it smell like? What ambient noises do you hear? What can you touch and sort of feel at the edges of a lawn? Which parts can be walked on? Which parts do you only look at and don't really participate with? This lawn behind me in the circle, you walk on the green parts of the lawn, but then within the boundary of this circle of vegetation, there's no path, there's nowhere to walk on, sit in, or engage with the lawn at all. You sit on a bench and you look at it, but you don't actually interact with it. And it's so different from this urban lawn that you see in the bottom left. That's all about engagement. This is an herb garden within a concrete space. So raised beds, imported soil, specific vegetation that either is for smell or taste, a few flowers. Anyway, looking at all these different aspects of how we do lawns, really it hits a kind of internal chord with the students. First, they hadn't considered it. And once they start to consider it, they realize how much of what they assume, what they value, is really based on where they grew up. So what they know and what they're most comfortable with. Kids who were raised in suburbia, often this is their default setting for what is aesthetically pleasing until they start to look around. Kids that were raised on farms similarly look towards farm-like landscapes and vistas for what is aesthetic. People raised in cities often are looking for the small and compact. So by giving a visual, a historic, a self-conducted experiential field look and an analytic look at lawns, I hope what we do is start this next generation really rethinking the total impact on the environment, the need versus the want of lawns. At what point in exterior landscaping do we start to recognize conspicuous consumption? The difference between imported or invasive or native species, the high maintenance versus low maintenance lawn care, and ultimately, what does it do to encourage or actually dissuade other people from wanting to engage with you? Does a lawn provide isolation, protection, and security by keeping you away from your neighbors? Or does it invite people in as a semi-public, semi-private space where neighbors and people in the community can see each other, look out for each other, and potentially help each other? Really, really, really different looks reflect much deeper societal trends. So this is my slight rebellion. There has never been a course like this before. And we are hoping that we establish it as a permanent seminar topic because it has so much power. This will be the third time I've run it. I'm running it right now. And the students are all upper division, so juniors and seniors as undergrads. They are also about to enter a professional world where they will themselves make these kinds of decisions as future homeowners and future residents of neighborhoods. So it's really got my students thinking about what kind of neighborhood do they want to live in and why? And are all neighborhoods successful? And how do you know? How do you measure these things?
We have Lois Kettle from Chesapeake, or Cadell, probably butchering your name, I apologize, with Chesapeake Conservancy. He's going to be talking about a new type of project they're doing to help identify future BMPs. And so I will hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Hey, everyone, Louis Cadell. I'm a geospatial program manager at Chesapeake Conservancy, and I help manage some of our projects on the conservation technology team. Get my screen set up here. So, can everyone see my screen?
Looks good.
So I guess just jumping right into it, I want to kind of share some of the work that we're conducting with the Chesapeake Bay program to essentially produce large landscape geospatial data sets with a particular focus on BMP opportunity mapping. So we have a 6-year cooperative agreement with the Bay program, which started in 2018 and will be wrapping up in 2024. Out of this agreement, we'll be producing high resolution land cover and land use data sets at a 1 meter resolution, a hyper resolution hydrography data set for more accurate stream channel delineations, which can be used for all kinds of different purposes. And then, based on some of this information and other ancillary data sets, we'll be mapping different opportunities for BMPs. So I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with the Agricultural Conservation Planning Framework, or ACPF, but this is basically an agricultural watershed management framework and GIS toolbox that was developed by the USDA out in the Midwest. It's freely available for download. Anybody with GIS know-how can take a look at it and start playing around on their landscape. It takes advantage of various databases with information on soils, water, landscape. And what comes out of it is a menu of site-specific conservation opportunities, to install practices and, with the aim of facilitating conservation discussions with landowners. So here at the Conservancy, we took a look at the ACPF toolbox, sought to adapt it to the Chesapeake from the Midwest. A lot of these practices, some are used out here, some not as much. But we were tasked with essentially producing these for the entire watershed, which is quite the monumental task. And here are some of the practices we have here, all agriculturally focused. I will add as a caveat that we are looking at adding to this list with some other potential stormwater BMPs, but that's further down the road. And also on the right, this is an example of what these BMP opportunity footprints would look like. They're essentially, line files, polygon files, and they're a great way of visualizing where these practices might fall in relation to other features. And you can start to do all kinds of other analyses once you have these footprints. So as I mentioned previously, this is a huge endeavor. Right now, the toolbox is set up so that you would manually go through it by each, small HUC 12 watershed. HUC 12 is a designation that USGS uses commonly for their hydrography data sets. We sought to find a way to input all these different high resolution data and automate it in a fashion to map across these very large areas. So I guess a question that might be asked is, what are we looking to do with this data? Some potential applications may include streamlining watershed planning, engaging a wider audience of practitioners with maps, data sets, getting those conversations started, improving understanding of where opportunities for these suite of practices may lie on the landscape and in relation to each other. Just essentially providing that resource for more efficient field visits when it comes to planning. And finally, potentially enhancing scientific validity and, just having that additional resource when putting in proposals for funding for project implementation. So I do want to give a plug for the high resolution land cover and land use data. This is at a 1 meter resolution. Currently, there is a data set available reflecting ground conditions from 2013/2014. I say 2 different years because the USDA has an agriculture imagery program where they fly 1 meter imagery across the entire United States. This is, they have these missions fly every few years. And so currently, the Conservancy is working with the Bay program and the University of Vermont's Spatial Analysis Laboratory to update this data set with a new layer that will reflect conditions in 2017 and 2018. And then in the next couple of years, there will be another data set coming out reflecting conditions in 2021 and 2022. And just, I guess, to, illustrate how a 1 meter data set might be useful. Currently, the most, commonly freely available data set is the 30 meter resolution national land cover data set. And this is great for all kinds of regional analyses and everything. But when you want to get down to the field scale, the pixel resolution can be a little trickier to work with, especially when you're trying to identify, say, like a forest buffer or smaller stream features. So getting down to that 1 meter resolution really helps here. So, once you have this land cover and land use data, you can start to identify where there may be gaps in riparian forest buffer coverage. As shown in this pink color here. Essentially what we do is, we'll identify a certain buffer distance along streams where there's no shrub or tree canopy cover, and then we'll highlight those on the landscape. And then, further than that, say you wanted to prioritize which gaps might be more effective or treating more area than others, you can start to model the area draining to each gap, such as the example on the bottom right here. And in that sense, perhaps you only have a limited amount of funding, you're trying to identify, where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. Analyses like this can help with that sort of planning. In addition to the land cover, I do want to point out the two images on the right here. The land cover data set will identify areas of surface water where it's, I guess, visible from the aerial imagery. Of course, when it comes to streams that go under tree canopy or just aren't visible due to some kind of vegetation, we need to utilize elevation data to model where water is flowing. And so we'll create this enhanced flow path data set that attempts to connect all these stream features that are not seen from the aerial imagery itself. And that helps with our riparian forest buffer opportunity mapping. And that's an example here on the left, different opportunities for a random area in the Nanticoke watershed. So, we've created these enhanced flow path data sets, but they do have limitations in that they tend to overestimate, especially in the headwater regions. And that's because the enhanced flow paths are based on a 60-acre flow accumulation value. And so, that one value is not going to be uniform across the entire landscape. It's going to differ from region to region. And so it has to be taken with a grain of salt. Currently, we're working with the Bay program to research a new method for mapping hydrography data. And this uses computer vision and what's called geomorphons. And essentially what it does is it takes a look at the line of sight of different features, whether concave or convex, on the landscape using elevation data to identify exactly where certain stream channels are. And so in this example here, this red line indicates the USGS National Hydrography Dataset stream channel, center line, and that's currently nationally available. Again, it's great for regional analyses, but sometimes when you need to either site restoration projects along these streams or get more accurate representations, it doesn't quite hit the mark every time. And so we're hoping that with this new data set, we'll be able to better capture the meanders of these stream channels, as shown in cyan here, and in some cases capture channels that were missed entirely, like on the left. So additional research and development that we're doing, we're trying to automate this data processing that's occurring. Previously it might take a very manual process where you either trace lines where streams are, based on the aerial imagery. If you wanted to identify specific types of features like, roadside ditches, swales, floodplain depressions, etc., that was often very tricky to do. And so we're trying to gather these data sets and essentially train the computer model to learn how to identify these features on the landscape in a more automated fashion. And that way, this can be done over time as new aerial imagery is collected, as new elevation data is collected over the years. This kind of, analysis can be done more frequently and with less input and human hours. Oh, I also do want to add that this new data set will also be measuring continuous estimates of channel width and bank height. And hopefully that can help with some, certain applications for in-stream applications as well. Further down the road, we will also be looking at ditch mapping, either roadside ditches or ag ditches. I know there are some great data sets out there already, especially in the Eastern Shore. But we're hoping to help automate some of the mapping, and, definitely when it comes to these sorts of data sets, it's always nice to compare, between different products that have been produced, and, just enhance the whole field forward, and collaborate where possible. I do want to touch a little bit on wetland restoration opportunity mapping. We're still working on automating the ACPF toolbox, and wetland restoration outputs is one of them. These data sets aren't quite ready yet. There's a lot of R&D happening, and we'll be reaching out to more local stakeholders, especially some members from this group here, and just to make sure that we're not way off the mark. And there are definitely certain parameters that will need to be tweaked region by region, and more specifically for the Nanticoke as well. So as I mentioned, as we're automating all this, model data is not ground truth. It's based on inputs that have their own errors. There are certain assumptions made. However, it is a very powerful tool when utilized for planning across very large landscapes. We see it as more of a starting process rather than the end all be all. And, as we move from region to region, we're having discussions, and we are looking to seek guidance to identify specific errors that might need to be addressed when adjusting the model. And one example here on the right, we modeled some contour buffer strips up in the lower Susquehanna region. And you can see, based on the imagery, that some of them line up fairly well. Others are somewhat off. And, that could be due to various reasons. Perhaps, there was a limitation in the data that we used, or the parameters need tweaking. Maybe they weren't specific to the lower Susquehanna, or perhaps the landowner just, had different designs in mind according to their field. So, just to reiterate, all this data is being produced, the hydrography, the land cover land use, BMP opportunity mapping. It will all be eventually freely accessible for download by, the general public for their own use, whether it's maps, analyses, etc. It will be available through the BAY program and the Conservancy's website, and potentially other platforms such as FieldDoc. But before then, we'll be gathering feedback and guidance prior to public release. And I do also want to say that, this is opportunity data, but it's not meant for regulatory purposes.
And our next speaker is Jerry Kaufman. He's going to be presenting on the economic value of the Nanticoke Watershed in Delaware and Maryland. And Jerry, you're free to take over.
Okay, is this NantiCon 2022, Lisa?
Woo!
Yeah, I think it's actually the best name of a conference I heard all year. I really wanted to be a part of it. So excited to be here, everyone. This is about almost a year to the day since Andrew and Kelly and Martha from our office, we presented a little session on the economics of the Nanticoke, and happy to do an encore version here today and discuss more discuss what we've learned. Lisa, how much time do I have here this afternoon?
15 minutes plus questions.
Okay, we'll do the 15-minute version. All right, so let's get started. Let me bring up the slideshow here and get started. Okay, the economic value of the Nanticoke Watershed, which happens to be one of my favorite watersheds personally. There's really a fascinating place. It's the further you go downstream to the mouth, it's like another world. When you're up here in northern Delaware, it's really hard to believe we're on the same Delmarva Peninsula. So we were working with the with the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance, the NWA, on an economic study. We know a lot about the ecology of the Nanticoke, but what about the economic value? Well, it turns out that there is a lot of dollars associated with the Nanticoke. But first, what about the Aboriginal people? You've written about, at least in your reports, your studies, Nanticoke is the indigenous name of the river, one of the few that has retained its original name. We know about the story of John Smith sailing up in the early 17th century. And there's also another name that's interesting. This is from a USGS report, Kuskawarik, which is an indigenous name reported by Captain John Smith again, as the place of making white beads. And this is an interesting map here that's produced by a tribal organization about the indigenous lands, the original lands. You can see the Nanticoke to the southwest of Delaware into the mouth of the Nanticoke, and to the east where the Lenape-Hackink. And when you really study, and then the Susquehannock, the war-making Susquehannock were just north of you. What's interesting is these tribal boundaries largely follow the large basin or watershed boundaries. You know, Susquehanna, Chesapeake, Delaware, Nanticoke. So the Aboriginal people knew a lot about the natural systems that really we ought to get back to. So let's look at the economic value of the Nanticoke. We went through and with our grad students, put together some estimates, 3 different ways, and we found out that the Nanticoke actually has about $3.7 billion in natural benefits, of ecosystem services benefits, about $2.5 billion if you estimated the value of like fishing and wildlife watching. And there are many, many jobs there that total up to about $500 million in wages, whether it's direct and indirect. And when you break it down, this is a nice graphic from the NWA about how it's broken down. You have a lot of recreation there, a lot of forest benefits, public parks. And when you add it all up, it's billions and billions of dollars in economic benefits. So a little bit about the history that you know, it is the largest river and watershed in Delaware itself, and it's almost 100 miles long. And but it's a very low-lying watershed. It's an average about 20 feet above sea level. And so we looked at it in 3 different ways just to make sure we were able to identify it. Looked at economic activity the first way, ecosystem services, which is the value of the habitat. You know, how much does a forest and wetlands provide in terms of water treatment or nursery value for young fish, and then the jobs and wages. So 3 different ways we looked at this. And so what we did was we looked at the demographics. We know that the split between Delaware and Maryland of this bi-state watershed is about 60-40, adding up to 827 square miles. We know that 827 is nearly half the size of all of Delaware, which is 2,000 square miles. And we have these very interesting times that when you get to take a field recon, the excellent little bivalve is my favorite, bivalve Maryland. That says a lot about it. And so we looked at the land use and the land cover. We know that this watershed has a lot of forest in it. It has half is agriculture, you know this. But what's also interesting is that it has this very valuable land cover of the freshwater and saltwater wetland, and open water, which is over a quarter of the watershed are these very valuable wetland habitats, which provide amazing ecological and economic value. Some of the highest you'll see actually in the mid-Atlantic, on the mid-Atlantic along the Atlantic seaboard. And so we looked at population. You have a watershed that has about 90,000 people in it, which is interesting. You can see the red shows the villages and the cities and the towns that are up and down the watershed there. So it's 90,000 people. That's about 1/10 the size of the population of Delaware. We look at use values, which is we can put $1 on it by looking at fisher anglers or bird watchers go and spend a night at the hotel room and buy equipment. And we look at non-use values, which means we ask people their opinion. How much would you be willing to pay to preserve or increase the quality of the Nanticoke watershed? That's the same technique that they use for the Exxon Valdez disaster in Alaska that the federal government got Exxon to pay based on the opinions of all the population of the United States of America, not just the citizens of Alaska. So this is what you'd be willing to pay to preserve that watershed. Even if I live up here in Newark, I would want to pay something because I just want to know that the Nanticoke is going to be preserved. That's called an existence value. And when we added it all up, just adding up the dollars, that's about $2.6 billion. There's some port navigation. It's a navigable port going up to Seaford. You can see all the public parks, state and local watersheds. We see the fish and wildlife and the water supply benefits. So what's interesting when we came up with it is all the open space that you have there, the public parks at the state, county, and local level provide a lot of benefits to the people, the residents, and the visitors. For instance, you don't have to buy a gym membership and use the Stairmaster because you have a public park that you can you do your daily workout in. So that provides an economic benefit. And then this is how you rank it. And this is what your individual watershed has in terms of what it's got going for you. You have a very valuable watershed because of this excellent combination of agriculture in tandem with the public parks and the recreation benefits. And so looking at just individual willingness to pay, that's the non-use benefit. If you looked at the willingness to pay for people to pay to increase the value of the water from boating to fishing and swimming, that's about a $17 million benefit that the 90,000 residents would be willing to pay for based on the studies. There's property value. You know that the value of the property, if you live in a house overlooking the water, that value is going to be higher than it would be if you were a few blocks away. And so the value of just the river and its tributaries and the estuary there is about the value there, provided the Bayside value is almost $1 billion if you spread it out over the 20 years. So that's significant. And some people say we actually undercount that benefit, that it actually should be higher. We're trying to be conservative, so we're not exaggerating. Wastewater benefits, modest. The river is the body of water that treats the water. And water supply benefits from the value of untreated water in the Nanticoke water, that's mainly groundwater, is equally about $4 million. And then there's an irrigation value. Right? Contributions to wildlife. The National Wildlife Refuge, Blackwater right there, is an economic engine, as published by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as you know. Blue crabs, there are many blue crabs in the estuary itself, and we associated that about $1.74 about a pound, $1.74 per pound is about it's about a $4.5 million blue crab fishery. Contrast that to the entire blue crab fishery of the state of Delaware, primarily along the Delaware Bay. That's 7 to 8 million. So the Nanticoke alone has a very valuable blue crab fishery, not just for recreation, but for commercial. And then you have all the people that go to hunt, fish, bird watch. This is from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. That's $123 million in economic value in both states. And then you have people that go to kayak and fish and bicycle along the river. That's a significant value. And then what's interesting to me personally is look at the economic value of power boating in the tidal portions of the river itself. As you go out into the Chesapeake there at the mouth that's the significant value, as well as the people spending. As a matter of fact, Delaware and Maryland are 7th and 23rd in the nation in terms of power boat expenditures. Little Delaware is big on the top 10 list in terms of power boating. That's an industry in itself that any elected official would love to have in terms of jobs. And then Trout Pond State Park has a spending, an annual benefit there of about $30 million. And that is an economic engine itself. Of course, we know Trout Pond is in your watershed. Ag sales in the watershed, the value of the product sold. And this is a minimum because this is just crop sales. This doesn't have to do with all the suppliers that provide irrigation, seed, indirect benefits of that. That is $1 billion in benefits in your watershed when you look at the 5 counties. And then also there's the value of the forest there. You have a significant amount of contiguous forest. And boy, can you see that when you go down to Bivalve and travel down that highway in the forest there. The forests provide often underthought but very real climate benefits of carbon storage. About $85 million of those trees are made of carbon, absorbing the carbon from the power plants. So more trees. And then there's the value of the state parks. And then of course the port, one of the few ports in Delaware where the boats can come up navigable and deliver the stone and the quarry stone and other supplies. That's a significant value as well. We look at the second indicator. Lisa, I know I'm just going to stay mindful of the time. All these habitats broken down have significant economic value. We do the math. And when you look at the present value of that, that's about 3.7 billion. If you take something like net present value, which is the economic value, that would be like if you got an insurance company to insure it over 100 years, that's 121 billion. That is one of the highest dollar per acre or square mile values that we've seen of any estuary system that we've done up and down the eastern seaboard. So pound for pound, you have a very valuable watershed, and it's worth protecting and restoring. And then going to the jobs and wages, when we look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Fish and Wildlife Service, all the various federal state agencies, and drill down to where the jobs are, direct and indirect. When you add them up, it's about 20,000 direct and indirect jobs that are associated with the 800, 900 square miles of the Nanticoke watershed itself. And so therefore your watershed is a jobs engine. And this is how we break it down. These are the sectors if you're interested. So in sum, no matter how you look at it, 3 different ways, over 2 billion in economic value, 3.7 in ecosystem services, that's the habitat. If you and then a significant $500 million in wages associated from 20,000 direct and indirect jobs. And so with that, we conclude that you live in a very environmentally interesting watershed, but also a very economically worthwhile watershed. It's worth continuing investing in that. But of course, you knew that already. We're just putting the numbers on it. So happy to be here and looking forward to the next time that we get a chance to come down and do a recon there again.
So our next speaker is Dee Durham. She's with Plastic Free Delaware, and she's going to be presenting on the state of the state reducing plastic waste in the Nanticoke watershed.
And it's always great to hear Jerry's economic spin on things. It's such a valuable perspective on what we're all trying to do. And so anyway, he's a tough act to follow, but I was hoping just to share with you all today what we're working on regarding reducing plastic pollution. And if you can go ahead forward, Lisa, if you don't mind. And next slide. We founded Plastic Free Delaware about 12 years ago in 2010 to first focus on single-use plastic bags. And you can keep going, Lisa. Next slide, please. It was actually when my kids were little, we were looking for something quick to do. And here we were. It took 10 years to get the plastic bag ban. But I don't know if you can see all these numbers, but these are just numbers. If you click it once more, I think, Lisa, you might get a header. But these are just numbers from the annual coastal cleanup, which is just really 3 hours, one Saturday every September, at least until COVID hit. And these are just numbers that we kept tracking regarding plastic pollution. And one of the things we looked at in particular was plastic bags. And even though the plastic bag, where large retailers are supposed to have bins in the front of the store, like grocery stores and stuff, at least on the Delaware side, I know Maryland's a little bit different, but for Delaware, even though that law went into effect in 2009, the amount of plastic bags found during cleanup still didn't really go down. So it wasn't really addressing the issue. Next slide, please. So I think everyone's aware, you can probably just scroll through these kind of quickly. I think everyone's aware of the the impact to animals and marine animals, even domestic farm animals that plastics have. I think hopefully everyone is aware that plastics come from natural gas and or oil. So they are part of, the climate change issue very much in terms of, oil refining and extracting, fracking, that sort of thing. And, are just kind of a bad idea all around, just because they at most are recyclable once generally. Next slide, please. And this is actually a litter study that was done a few years ago in Delaware, that the darkest green pieces of the pies here just indicate plastics that are found on roadsides. So again, they're a huge problem. Next slide, please, Lisa. So yeah, go ahead, next slide. I know we're short on time, I'm just gonna keep going. So I think, make sure everyone understands too that plastics are not biodegradable. Sometimes you'll see labeling that indicates they are, but unless they're made out of an organic material, they really are not biodegradable. And plastics in general do break down into microplastics in our marine environments. And more and more studies are coming out right now that prove the plastics are getting into our food chain, and we are literally, all of us, eating plastic every day, and there are health impacts to that as well. More and more studies being done about the cancer causing aspects of plastics, and it's also an endocrine disruptor. So lots and lots of scientific research coming out daily almost about just what a bad idea this is to perpetuate the use of single-use plastics when there are good alternatives. Next slide, please, Lisa. And again, go ahead to the next one. I'll just comment again that, plastics are not biodegradable, and, we shouldn't be kind of let some sort of myth of biodegradability in terms of plastics kind of change the way we go about trying to reduce them. What we really need to do is reduce their use to begin with. When for single-use plastics in particular, there are good alternatives. We're not arguing that plastics are going to go away completely. Obviously, there are great uses for plastics in our lives. Go ahead, Lisa. But less than 10%, it is said, of plastic bags and bottles and all that are recycled. So that means that 90% of our plastics are either going to the landfill or ending up out in the environment. So Plastic Free Delaware undertakes educational programming as well as advocacy. Next slide, please. And we focused, as I said earlier, primarily on single-use plastic bags back in the beginning. And it literally took us 9 years to get a plastic bag bill passed in Delaware. So that actually went into effect. Hopefully, at least those of you from Delaware understand or have seen, that went into effect last January 1st. Part of the frustrating part was that a lot of the large retailers sort of didn't abide by the letter of the law or the spirit of the law, and they just started handing out thicker plastic bags. Next slide, please. So we went back last year to the legislature and got another bill passed that tightened up the law following New Jersey's model of a plastic bag bill that they had gotten passed in New Jersey just the year before, where they defined acceptable reusable bags as having stitched handles. And that sort of takes care of the whole thickness issue. And then we also, in this bill that was signed by the governor in September, expanded it to all retailers. So before it was only the largest retailers, your grocery stores, the Home Depots, the Walmarts, that kind of thing, that were beholden to the plastic bag law. But this law that got passed last year in Delaware will go into effect July 1st and will cover all retailers. So we're really hoping that this will make a huge difference in Delaware come later this year. Although I will say that in my conversation last year with the Public Works department manager in the city of Wilmington, she said that even after last year's law went into effect last January 1st, they've noticed a huge difference in Wilmington in much fewer plastic bags out on the street and much fewer clogging their stormwater systems. So she was really appreciative of the first law, and this law should just make it even better. Next slide, please, Lisa. We also last year we had two wins last year. We had a balloon bill. It was SB 24, I think, that was passed. Go ahead, Lisa, to the next one. That's just a statistic from one cleanup on Mother's Day is apparently one of the worst days for finding balloons on the beach. And I'm sure I don't need to tell all of you, you probably find them all the time in the watershed. So in Delaware, we now join other states up and down the mid-Atlantic. I think we're the 7th state to pass a balloon release ban bill, and basically classifies balloons as littering, which is what they are. It's just for some reason people thought of them differently because they go up before they go down and land on the ground. So hopefully this will help reduce the amount of balloons that are found out there in the Nanticoke watershed. Next slide, please. So we actually also last year had 2 bills introduced to ban polystyrene, which Maryland, I think, has already done, and DC has as well. DC is a real leader on these issues, and New Jersey has as well now. So the bills last year sort of had some technical issues with them, and so we're hoping still this session in Delaware to have actually a new bill come back to address polystyrene. So stay tuned on that. I can let Lisa know, and hopefully you'll hear more about that coming forward soon. Hopefully, maybe even in March this year, it'll be introduced. That's what the prime sponsor we were told. If you're interested, please reach out to Senator Trey Parody, is the senator who was priming that bill. Next slide, please, Lisa. And you can go ahead. This is just a graphic that sort of makes fun of the fact we're also working on what's called a truth in labeling bill, which Maryland has a bill. I'm sorry, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I learned just last week that Maryland has a truth in labeling bill that's been introduced, and we are looking to introduce one. New York State also has one in the works. California passed one last year, and Washington and Oregon are also in various stages of passing truth in labeling bills. But this concept goes to the fact that the chasing arrows symbol is often put on many things that are not truly recyclable, various forms of packaging and plastic, and people think that if the chasing arrow symbol is on something that they can throw it in their curbside bin, and that's just not always true. And so there's a growing movement across the country to try to get at that issue. And so we hope to have a bill on that this year as well. Go ahead, Lisa, to the next one. This is a federal bill, which some of you may be familiar with, that was started actually about 2 years ago to get at a whole bunch of different plastic related issues and try to address them at the federal level. We're thinking that the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is not going to pass, at least in its current form, but pieces of it are moving forward. So it's something to keep an eye on, and depending on which state you're in, keep in touch with whoever is advocating for the different pieces of it. I can, also try to keep Lisa informed to email out to her constituents with the watershed group. Go ahead, Lisa. So as part of our growing pains over the last decade or so, we've actually been sort of morphing beyond just single-use plastics and more into reducing waste in general and trying to focus on a zero waste perspective. Go ahead, Lisa, to the next one. So we actually have one, I just wanted to let you know about a couple programs that we're starting up, which might be of interest to you. One is the Cultivating Community Composting. I know Maryland's a little different because you have an industrial composter. In Delaware, we don't. I'm sure many of you probably backyard compost, but community composting is one way that we can address the fact that 37% of the landfill in Delaware is food waste. And especially since we don't have an industrial composter, we can't really have curbside composting or that sort of thing. So we are trying to set up community composting programs all around the state, you know, where maybe at a food co-op or a community garden or wherever it might be, you can actually collect your food scraps and bring them to that central site, you know, where a small community of or a church maybe that has a garden, where we can start reducing the food waste impact in the landfill. Go ahead, Lisa, to the next one. Also just wanted to mention we have a high school summit coming up in April for all high school students. The website there, delawareyes.org, can give you lots more information. Registration opens on March 1st. And I'm sure we wouldn't mind if a few folks from Maryland came as well. It's free to attend for teachers and their high school teams. So keep an eye on that, check out that website. Go ahead, Lisa, to the next one. Trying to get that, our youth summit came about because we saw how powerful kids could be of all ages. From, you know, when we were doing the plastic bag bill, we had kids from age 5 on up through college helping as advocates, and they can be so powerful. So that's why we launched the high school summit, to get kids even more involved in these issues. The Wild and Scenic Film Program is a new program we're also just launching, which is for school divisions of all ages. And it's available to both Maryland and Delaware schools. And it's a film-based program of environmental short films and associated curriculums. So, and then what we hope to do is pair those curriculums with groups like the Nanticoke Watershed Coalition to then get the kids outside, and either on the campus doing projects like rain gardens and things like that, or you know, out into the community helping with other projects. So the part of the program is to link up the schools with actual hands-on experiences for the students. So you can reach out to us if you're interested in bringing that to your school. We're just getting underway there. Next slide, Lisa. I think that might be the last one. Yep, there we go. So happy to take any questions, and that's a quick overview of things we've been working on for the last few years.